Welcome to the Titan Protection Show. Today, we are partnering with ASIS and discussing the transition from law enforcement to the private sector. We've got a great panel today. You are going to learn how to keep your identity, what's your purpose as you make that transition, some tips on preparing for that. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the ASIS Law Enforcement Transition Podcast. Welcome everybody. Appreciate everybody being here. I'm Ryan Smith with Titan Protection, here with Terry Owens, Director of Security with Shamrock Trading Corporation.
Yep. Hey, thanks for having us on, Ryan.
Yeah, appreciate it. Also joined here with Josh Ball, Senior Security and Safety Leader for Kansas City Chiefs. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you.
And also with Rachel Murdock, former FBI agent, and now has transitioned into private practice, mental health therapy, that type of thing, something that very interested in digging a little deeper. But thank you all for being here.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on, Ryan.
Yeah. And I thought, maybe we'll just start, kind of go around the horn a little bit and talk. I mean, a lot of this discussion starts around, we started in law enforcement, we transitioned into the private sector. There's a lot of interest in that. A lot of people like to hear kind of that story, what led the motivation, what that was like. So just kind of want to just kick it off and maybe just kind of talk about what law enforcement experience was, what you're doing now, what that transition looked like, and just kind of have an open discussion about what you found beneficial, what advice you might give to other people, and just kind of what you learned through that process. But Josh might kick it off with you if you don't mind, but
Absolutely.
Appreciate you being here. Love to hear a little bit about your story.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Started out of high school, fell in love with fire and EMS, and then went into law enforcement at 21, started deputy sheriff in a small city outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and fell in love with just the public servant and had opportunity. Went to the Louisville Airport Authority, and we were police fire EMS cross-trained. Spent most of my career there and left there in 2021 as the chief. And I left for an opportunity to lead security for the Kentucky Derby. And as a Kentucky boy, that was a pretty cool thing for me. But definitely some transition things that I had not prepared for that learned through that, and just trying to share anything I can that kind of helps that transition happen maybe a little easier, and if done properly, maybe pre-planned.
Yep.
And think through those things prior to making that jump.
That's one of the things that I want to dig a little deeper, because I think that comes up a lot. Is I think, there's always that mentality or that perception of you're in law enforcement and then how do you monetize that in the private sector? And I think there can sometimes be that thought that it just happens. Like they're just going to hire me. I have all this experience. And I think that planning process, and Terry, that's something that you spent a lot of time with. Once you kind of had it in your mind that you were going to make that leap, you spent some time preparing for that and kind of going through that. Josh, I kind of gathered your scenario was different, or do you feel like you did prepare for it, or you prepared as best as you could?
I just did not think through everything that it would hit.
Interesting. Anything that stands out as a big lesson or a big thing that showed itself through that process?
I lost my sense of purpose for several months, and there's an emptiness when you knew every day going to work what your purpose was, your mission in life, and losing that, you feel soulless sometimes.
Yeah. Did that, and I totally agree, does that tie into identity at all, in the sense of, because that happens, all your friends and
they say you're a product of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. Right. Now, all of a sudden, it's no one that you've spent the last 20 years of your life with.
Right.
And even no matter who that person is in law enforcement, really the broader public service, it's the same type of people, even if it's a different individual. And it's completely different when you're sitting in a boardroom and, you're next to a Harvard grad or, a law school or whatever. It's just a completely different mentality, and you quickly, I remember standing out front talking to a friend of mine who was still on the force, and he was eyeing retirement, and we're both like, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. I am trying to find who I am now. I've lost that. And he kind of paused his retirement for 2 years and really did some deep soul searching before he made that leap. because he saw what it was doing to me internally.
Right. When you decided, and so when you were at that point, had you already had your next job, or were you searching for that? So you
I
had
was already in it.
Interesting. Okay, so you had made the transition, and then it was like, okay, I'm feeling different.
The one thing that really hit, I remember I left 2 weeks before the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks.
Okay.
And spending most of my career in law enforcement at an airport was something that was you knew your purpose every single day, right?
Oh, yeah.
We never wanted another thing like that to happen in the aviation industry. And I partly felt like I also quit on the mission.
Yep.
Like I left everyone else behind. Not that I was going to single-handedly change anything, but it just was that the purpose was gone, but also I kind of felt like I was a traitor. I'd given up on the mission. And I think the timing of that 20th anniversary, everyone else, remembering it. And I remember being at home, I think it was a Saturday. I just remember being at home on that 20th anniversary, and there wasn't even the sense of pride as an American that I always felt on those anniversaries in the years past.
Right. That's so interesting, because I share that same, I feel like I had the same experience where it was like, it was interesting to see that the people that you were so close with, you're not as plugged into anymore. It's almost like you're on the outside looking in, but also listening to your story, you are very much still plugged into that 9/11. I mean, from Kentucky Derby, chief, like events and, protecting that is very much part of the same mission, but seeing how that, and preparing for that. And that's a great transition. And Rachel, I'm sure you've got a lot to offer that story, and I'm interested to kind of dig into that a little bit more, because, the mental health aspect of law enforcement and kind of your story, but love to hear a little bit about your background and your transition from law enforcement.
Yes. So I was FBI Crimes Against Children. I actually was a civilian, but I would kind of consider my role like a second responder, because once things are cleared and it's safe, then we're going in and interviewing the child victims and witnesses to whatever crime we, are investigating. So one of my first big mass violence incidents was the Boston bombing. So I had been with the FBI for 4 months, and that occurred, and I was a runner. And so that one hit close to home, thinking like this felt like this was, an attack on our country, but also an attack on a small community, or a large community really, in the US. So that was when I realized, like, okay, like FBI investigates some pretty big stuff. Like, it's not just going to be what locally happens in Kansas City. Like, I can be sent anywhere at any time. Spent some time in the US, time internationally working child sex tourism cases. So I laugh because my last international trip was in Kazakhstan, not somewhere that many people have on a bucket list, right?
Right.
But I resonate, a lot with the feeling of quitting, because I was protecting the nation's most vulnerable in children, and feeling like, man, not everybody can work crimes against children, and I can. And so if I don't, what does that mean about me? Like, it really became a part of my identity and something I did for 17 years. So when I was thinking about getting out, I felt selfish, and I felt like, is the grass really greener on the other side? And so I spent 3 years, so I'm kind of on the opposite end, where I spent 3 years kind of pining over, what is this going to look like? Am I really going to be able to separate? The imposter syndrome was huge, because I knew I had a lot of experience. And when I was hired by the FBI, I was one of 5 people that had my job in the country. So I felt like I was marketable, and I had some skills that not a lot of people had. But I still felt like, what if I fall on my face and everyone says, see, we told you shouldn't have left the FBI. So I spent a significant amount of time planning, but even with that planning, imposter syndrome is going to be there, and you've just got to be willing to hustle. And so I knew, like, things are not going to fall into my lap because I'm former FBI and because I've done some cool things. I'm still going to have to go out and have some humility that I've not done this before. And my passion to help with mental health in the first responder space is what got me to opening my group practice, because I was seeing over the years that we were just not taking good care of ourselves. We were expected to go work these terrible incidents and then just go on to the next one and the next one. And when people were struggling, it was held against them in our field. It was, well, you aren't fit for duty, or you can't do this anymore. We're going to transfer you to an undesirable, position because you can't handle this. Exactly. Right. So for me, I wanted to leverage the relationships that I had in the first responder space and my own critical incident exposure to be able to say, I can resonate with what it feels like to be betrayed by your agency, or what it feels like to be in these spaces where bad things happen, and use that to help. People talk about mental health in a different way. We're not going to sing Kumbaya and braid each other's hair, which is what people are thinking.
Right.
But we can actually talk shop, and you can be who you are, and you can have a confidential space to do that. So that's kind of what led me to where I'm at now.
Man, you touch on a lot there, and especially that vulnerability side in law enforcement. There's this aspect of you're supposed to be superhuman, and these feelings don't come, and they don't come. And I don't know, maybe you all have some of the same experience. I also, the weird side of that too is some of the people I'm the most vulnerable with were some of the police officers that I worked with, and you kind of had that. But there is that stigma of you can't talk about these things, or you're weak if you have these. Now that you've transitioned into this role, are you finding that that's still a challenge? Or are you finding that people are opening up more to those types of conversations, or seeking that sort of that help? Because we were talking about this a little bit earlier, where that stigma's there, but it also seems like it's almost the more strong thing to do to talk about it or get help than it is just stuff it down. Are you seeing that change, or are you still seeing that stigma kind of sticking around?
I think the stigma's been around for so long, like we're definitely heading in the right direction, but we've got a lot of years to undo. When you talk to somebody who's 30 years of a seasoned first responder, when they're told for 25 to suck it up, buttercup, and now the last 5, we say, actually, that wasn't great advice, so we'd like you to open up. I think a lot of them are like, where do I even start? Like, I've been burying this stuff and sweeping it under the rug, but I do think the narrative is shifted to, we have so many suicides in the first responder space, and those are very publicly posted now on social media. Like, people are talking about that, which is positive that there's narrative around it, because whenever someone completes suicide, almost always people say, we had no idea it was this bad. We would have done something if we could have. And so this narrative of handling things by yourself is kind of in the past. And there does seem to be a more openness and willingness to do it with the right professional. So I know on the mental health side, we are really proud to be able to say that we are, culturally competent to be able to work with first responders. So not every clinician is created equal and may not be the right person for that space. But when you get somebody that has buy-in in that community, it helps, because there's a bit of a trust, and that person gets that reputation. So, I've got contracts with multiple agencies, so they all know who I am, and they talk, because first responders talk.
Yeah.
And so when this agency has a good experience with me and they share that with another agency I'm partnering with, that helps let those walls down a little bit. So I definitely think we're getting there. It's not to say everybody is excited, for these mandatory wellness visits that I do, because it's mandatory.
Well, I was going to ask that. So that is typically driven by the agency to say, you're going to go see Rachel and talk.
Yes.
Is it ever the opposite? Because I think sometimes too, and even in my own personal experience, sometimes emotional stuff and you have no idea, like you can't even identify it. Right. So how do you seek out help for that? Do you get a good amount of people that seek help, or if it is mandated, then they start to find some relief or some help with that, and that's what kind of opens it up? Or is
it's both. I mean, the state of Missouri in 2021 passed a statute that all first responders have to meet with a mental health professional every 3 to 5 years minimum. Each agency decides what that looks like. So most of the agencies that I work with, it's once every 1 to 3 years, just depending on their size, what they can afford, things of that nature. But what we have found is that's kind of that foot in the door. So that's the requirement, and everybody has to do that. But they also have a point of contact. So if they need something outside of that mandatory wellness visit, rather than them having to search around and find somebody to connect with, they have a direct line of communication to say, hey, I think I need some help. Because sometimes it's not the professional things, it's a personal issue that arises, or a critical incident occurs. And, recently in the Kansas City metro area, a police officer was shot about 2.5 weeks ago. And I partner with that agency. And so I'm that first phone call from the mental health side to be coming in for critical incident debriefs. And so it just kind of smooths that process out. But the conversation goes both ways. Either the agency is saying, here's your visit, but you can also reach out confidentially in between those visits, and that information doesn't go back to the department. So they have no idea how many of their department members I'm treating in the therapy confidential space. They know that there are some, because we want to let them know that it's working, but we're not saying, hey, Joe Smith came in for a visit and then he decided he had some other concerns and he's going to come back for treatment. It's just Joe Smith came in for a visit. You can mark him off the list as meeting this statutory requirement.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When you were starting to think about making that transition career-wise, was that driven by, you thought the private practice, was that more entrepreneurial or more kind of purpose-driven? And then was there a backup plan in the sense, because I heard you say earlier that it's like, well, what if I fail with this? Or because I had a similar experience, but I'm just curious if there was a backup plan and kind of what the motivation was to make the leap.
Yeah. So the motivation was, 17 years of crimes against children exposure was just becoming too much.
Okay.
I became a mom and I thought, I am not going to let my child do anything if I don't stop being inundated with this all of the time. She still doesn't get to do much, but it's better than it would be if I was inundated, because you just know too much. Like you've seen too much, you know that 95% of the world is probably not evil, but when you see the 5% all of the time, it's hard not to, distrust everyone. So for me, it was, I don't want to travel anymore. I was traveling weekly. I want to be home with my family. I have, my priorities just in life had changed. And so when I said, what do I want to do? I interviewed for a few different companies and was offered the jobs, and I just turned them down. And so I was like, I'm trying this. It just doesn't feel right. It was a salary. It was predictable. There was some comfort there, but I just kept going back to, nope, I think I want to get back into the mental health side. And so there wasn't really a backup plan other than me saying, I can't be replaced at home. I can be replaced at work. So if I do this and it falls flat, I will just get another job.
Right.
And that was
The backup plan is you knew these jobs that weren't really exciting you were still going to be there if this didn't work.
Right.
Very similar to kind of my thing. It was more like, but I had the space to fail because it was like I go start a company, and if it didn't work, you could go back to law enforcement. I didn't have a family at the time and that type of thing. So it was, very interesting. And Terry, I know you, when you came from Kansas City, you had very kind of purposefully thought about making that leap into more of the corporate type of security. And you spent a lot of time, with ASIS, getting your CPP and kind of going through all that process. And, talk a little bit about that for you, because I think that's been a success story in the sense of, that's kind of how much time you put into it is what you get out of it on the other end. So kind of talk a little bit about your process and, your journey.
So, it's very similar in a lot of respects of going through the interview process, and something that you don't expect is the failure. You have to give yourself room for failure, but also having the forethought to go, that doesn't give you an excuse to stop. If you have a goal, this is what you're going to make it. You're going to make it happen. And we talked offline, Rachel and I talked offline a little bit earlier. There's a couple things that really resonated. The identity crisis before is it's kind of becomes the Iron Curtain. Josh talked a little bit about that. The Iron Curtain of you are only relevant for very short amount of time where people are still reaching out, and then it just stops.
It's right.
It just stops.
It stops. Yeah.
It's like that cold hard. It stops right then and there, and there's really nothing you're going to do about it.
How long do you think that took when it was like, people that you were close with to all of a sudden now it's like, man, I haven't talked to anybody from...
Probably between 3 months and maybe I would say at the most 6 months.
That's faster
I would say
than
that's
you
very
think.
similar. Yeah, it's very quick how that just becomes, you're on the outside looking and not let you, you still, not in a bad way where you're like, they turn their back on me. It's just you're in a different world and a different identity.
They don't understand it either. That's part of it.
Yeah.
They don't know how to engage. You don't know how to engage. You don't have the same jokes, those
Right.
inside jokes anymore.
Yeah.
And so you're just...
And the us versus them mentality, and now you're them, right? And not in a bad way, but it just in a different way.
Yeah.
Betrayal. It's almost like you've betrayed it. You talked about it earlier. It's just one of those things where they don't get it anymore. And on the way out, one of my big drivers for success was when I was checking out, I stopped by the recruitment office to say goodbye to a couple people, and somebody who was in the academy class before me. We had come up together as officers, and she said to me, she said, just so you know, most people who leave before 15 years come back. And I actually have that written on my office wall, like written on a whiteboard on my office wall, as part of the reason for success is I'm not going to let somebody tell me that this is,
You're gonna fail.
You are going to
Yeah.
fail.
Right.
That's actually my motivation for making it work. And if I'm experiencing that, that imposter syndrome of, is this just me? And I've figured out that no, it's not just me. And through doing a lot of this with ASIS and doing it, communicating out with people across the country, it's not just me. And how can I help people now?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And I think too, if you think about it, if you have made the decision that you are going to get out of law enforcement and move into the private sector, I think there's a piece of that where that doesn't start with just starting to throw applications out at places. I think and you were kind of part of that, where you very deliberately got your CPP, you were working on things, you were networking, and that's a big piece of this conversation too, is how you're connecting with people. And I think there's a lot of work that goes into this before you actually start to do that, to prepare yourself mentally and also just to clean up yourself professionally and career-wise. And Josh, I was a little bit, interested in your scenario. How did the job come about? Did they recruit you from that, or did you purposely make a decision to say, I'm getting out of law enforcement and I'm going?
Relationships.
Right.
Someone that I knew worked there and was like, you're the guy. The person left. You should put in. Talk to my boss is the hiring manager, and it was like, well, what else? Nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it was like, boom, here it is, and it happened so fast. You're trying to process everything and go back and forth and try to understand. And one thing you understand, bonuses and stock options, things that you don't get in the government.
Yep.
You have all this before you and you're like, oh, it sounds great. And it may be, but we don't understand that because we're not getting bonuses. We're not getting all these other fringe benefits. And so it looks really good and promising. And you have to make sure you think through that as well, or, that may bite you in other ways. So it's relationships though. And no regrets, loved it, miss it. Looking back, still miss some of it, but have a completely different life. I think happier most of the time. Lot of it sounds like I need to go talk to Rachel. But it is, I think relationships is key, even in and out. But I think you set your reputation long before.
Yes.
And you build upon that and build upon that. And even when you mess up, you own it, you correct it, and people know. I think that sets you up for success, both with the relationship building, but also with businesses have a different process on how they handle counseling and disciplining. And you got to show that you can go in, take that constructive feedback. I think private sector is probably a little better at giving that than we are in public safety.
Yeah. Well, very different. You have to learn to talk a different language because it's, and I'm sure you saw that a bit, because you're talking about when you're in law enforcement, it's all about activity and how you're doing things. And then you get into the corporate side and it's all numbers. And, especially when you're speaking up and putting things, you have to put that in terms of ROIs and, profit and these types of things in language we don't speak. And a lot of times our success depends on how well we bridge that gap between physical security and then up to the executive branch that sees things, rightfully so. They're looking at a bunch of different things. They need that data in a different way than we're used to doing. And that, I think those two things, the networking aspect of, I don't know many people that have made that leap without a strong networking apparatus to help them get to the position they are. And then that culture shock of how we communicate internally is a completely different set of language. I think if people don't prepare themselves for that, that can be a wide awakening.
Can I add something in real quick? Everybody sitting in this room, I met virtually before I ever met them in person.
Right.
I talked to every single one of you over LinkedIn before I ever met you in person. So just to give you that powerful
LinkedIn
network.
is one that I know you used well to kind of find and identify, because too, there's also an appetite from the corporate side of they're looking to fill these positions with qualified people. So they want to, develop relationships and do different things. But it seems like, and Rachel, you're in kind of a different scenario too, kind of like mine, where it was more entrepreneurial, where you almost kind of dive in and then you're figuring out. For me, it was, I had to figure out all the corporate stuff on my own, a trial by fire type of thing. Did you have a similar, then
Absolutely. It was like, okay, like we're just going to learn from this. And, I can also say that diversifying my skill set was helpful, that I didn't feel trapped per se, because I had other things that I felt competent to do. And I think that's one thing I hear from people that are transitioning. They're like, this is all I've ever known or all I've ever done. And so getting those certifications, working on some of the things that will make you more marketable. And one thing LinkedIn is great at is showing you what's out there. And so I was starting to see, how are these other practices operating? What seems to be going well? What seems to be a growth area for them? And they don't teach you how to run a business in graduate school to be a psychologist. And so I didn't learn how to run a business. I learned how to treat mental health. And so that was something like you trial by fire, and you learn, you are humble about it, you apologize if you need to, and then you course correct. And so I think if you do go that entrepreneurial route, you've got to be a hustler, and you've got to be willing to kind of overdo it for a while, because I know I worked more than I did when I worked at the FBI, and I said, oh, I'm leaving this job so I can work less. And then I'm like, oh no, I'm working more. What happened?
Very similar scenario.
But you have to at first, because you're setting the stage for those, like the long game.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a different feeling. Especially it's something, I mean, you can quit, but you can't quit a bit, like it's a different, it's almost a different scenario. And I was going to say too, with that period of, if you're thinking about making this leap, do the work leading up to it. Josh, your scenario is a little bit different in the sense that the job kind of came to you while you were there. In hindsight, I mean, did that process work out the way? Would you have changed anything? Would you have done anything different preparing? Or
honestly, if I probably would have tried to go the Terry route, I probably would have talked myself out of it, being scared, and never would have made the jump. I think it was kind of that opportunity, and it's now or never.
Yeah.
I probably just would have stayed in the comfort zone. Government salary, pension.
Yeah.
You know your job, and you go. Your people. It's the same people you've worked with day in, day out. No, I think I'd have been scared. I don't think I would have made the leap.
Had you had much thought about leaving or changing careers before?
Always looking just to kind of see what was out there, but mainly it was more planning for, when that retirement date comes and I am ready, just kind of knowing where my skills needed to be, start learning. But, I was really thinking, at least another 10, maybe 15 years. I loved my job. It wasn't running away from it. Wise person once told me to never run from something, run to it.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I felt this was. It was running to that opportunity. That's changed my life and my family's life, and opened up opportunities that the other job never would have offered, but it was critical to get to this step.
Right.
You were at retirement, you were vested and ready. I mean, at that point you were transitioning to career 2 from a retirement and
I left early, but I was close, but vested in it, so I can collect. In a few years, I'll get my money. But was great retirement system, had insurance.
Right.
It was more of a opportunity that I mean, to this point, I could have just gone back. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. That was the backup. You touched on something else there too that I wanted to dig a little deeper into, was the family aspect of things. I had was one of the motivating factors for me to leave at the time I did. Was I didn't have a family at the time, so I figured if I was going to fail, that was the time to do it. Just kind of interested in the family experience of this and how much impact that had on the decision, good or bad, and kind of how that went. But just kind of curious when you went through that.
I was working so Louisville, Kentucky is a mid-market city. Sure. But the airport where I was at is the global hub for United Parcel Service.
Right.
And so they operate at night. Their passenger airport operates in the day. So it is a 24/7 operation.
Wow.
Phone ringing nonstop, and traveling a lot. You're in DC a lot. My oldest child knew me to be gone at least once 1 week a month, and always on the phone and working and keeping up. And you transition, and it's a different, like, you're busy in business because you have the OKRs and the KPIs and all these metrics you have to hit. But I was at least home.
Right.
Or at least in the same city. How's that?
Yeah.
So it was a culture shock, I think, for all of us.
Right.
But then, on the business side, again, it's not just activity. They want to see, how the numbers come out. So when you're having to teach yourself all of that, what probably could be a 40 to 50 hour a week job is more like 60 to 70.
Right.
Because you're doing the work, teaching yourself the work, changing what work you did originally from what you've learned, and just trying to tread water and stay ahead.
Right.
But my first couple years were very rough. Now I'm to the point I feel like it was worth it because I am spending time with my kids. I have young kids, 7 and 13, and I am able, wife and I go on walks every night, and we're actually to that point. But it took 4 years of just all in learning,
Right.
To be able to get to that point where it's like, okay, I feel comfortable. Because imposter syndrome is real.
It is, 100%.
I don't care who you are. If you say you don't have it, you're lying. Because it took me the longest time to feel like I belong here and I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And when you get that, there's some power in it.
Oh,
There
yeah.
really is.
100%. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
you hit it spot on there too, for sure. You talked about that earlier too, about, the KPIs and the OKRs. And I've said this before with security. Our losses get tallied up really easily. Our wins don't so much, because if we deter something or something, so it's on us as professionals to be able to articulate that in a way that makes sense to management and people above. Because we've had that where customers go, we really don't think we need security anymore. It's been really quiet here. And we're like, well, that's because it's working. And so how do we quantify that and put that into data? But, it's an interesting scenario. But Rachel, kind of interested in your family. How did that come into the discussion at all, or consideration when you were?
Yeah, I've got a 4-year-old, and so for me, I wanted to feel settled by the time she starts kindergarten. I don't want to be gone all the time. I want to be able to show up for her at programs and be able to be in the PTA and just all these things that I remember from my own childhood, like my parents showing up. And I was gone every week. And so I was not consistently home except on the weekends. And there was some unpredictability too, because you had what you scheduled, but then if there's a missing child or some other emergency, you're pulled in for that. So I never knew what each week was going to look like. And my husband just kind of had to be ready to roll with the punches. So that's another reason I wanted to work for myself, is so I could control that. But I did recreate the chaos I came from. So I had no boundaries. At first, I said yes to everything, even things I didn't really care to do because I was so worried about income. And I thought, well, if this doesn't pay well, if it doesn't pan out, let me have all these backup plans. And so now, again, I'm in the same position as he is, where I'm like, okay, this is starting to slow down. It's starting to pay off. But those first couple of years were pretty constant connection to the phone and worry. And the economy is changing too. And so where people are spending their money varies. And so sometimes what is disposable for people is mental health, because they think I need therapy, but I can't afford it. So I need to be able to also pay my bills. So we're riding the waves of the, economy. And so it's been a wild ride, but I feel like now I can breathe. And like you, I'm home every night. I'm home for dinner. I'm home for bath time and bedtime. And that was the goal, because you can't get that time back.
Right.
And it goes by in a blip. If you're a parent, you blink and they're 18.
Yep.
And so I knew that, this agency that I'm pouring my heart and soul into will replace me. They did it faster than you think it's going to happen, and you feel very disposable. But at the end of the day, again, you can't be replaced at home. You will be replaced at your previous job. And so prioritizing what matters, I think, is just super important.
Was there ever a time, and this is kind of just a general question to anybody, that you felt like you made the wrong decision, or that, because I'm gathering from talking, I don't want to speak for anybody, it doesn't sound like anybody regrets any of these decisions to transition to a different career or job, but was there ever a point where you're like, oh God, what have I done?
Every moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was lots of doubt.
Well, and I wanted to kind of, maybe to anybody that's listening, kind of give them the piece of we're talking about all the bad things, or the things that you may want to look at from, from the perspective, but I don't think any of us have said it wasn't the best decision for ourselves, our families, our career, that type of thing. I think we're just trying to maybe put out there what worked well, what didn't. And I was going to give the advice that, you really want to kind of go the Terry route of more prepare yourself for it. You had a different scenario, Josh, that seems to work out as well. Maybe the point is more just be deliberate about what you're doing and not.
Everyone is so unique. And
Right.
I think that's the hard thing. And that's one thing I always try to be very upfront when someone does reach out is, listen, this is what worked for me.
Right.
But I'm my own quirk, right?
Right.
I know me and how I work. I don't know a lot of the people that are reaching out. I've got a good friend that left and became a commercial real estate agent. He went back and forth, and then sometimes when the economy changes, right, he got a part-time job in law enforcement to help. But he, if you ask him, it was the right decision.
Right.
But it's like everyone's just so unique. I think the key is if you're going to do it, and don't get me wrong, a safety net's great, especially if you're trying to provide for your family. You've just got to go all in and do it.
Yeah.
And because I think it's the psychology when you're telling yourself that safety net's there, you're setting yourself up to fail.
That's a great point. And that's when I said more, I was kind of giving myself space to fail. That wasn't saying it was okay. It was more so saying like, now is the time to do it, but I've got to fully commit. There is no other
what's
option.
the worst that happens? You have that. But it's like, you said it, like less than 15 years, if you let that get in your head,
Right.
oh, I'm not going to make it. I think you just like, we're going to go all in. Now, in knowing you have a safety net's great, but it's only there because, OSHA made you put it there, not because you asked for it.
Right.
It's the catch because you have to, not necessarily because you want it there.
Right.
Well,
And just because it's hard afterwards doesn't mean it's wrong. And that's what I reminded myself. Like, there were days that I was like, what in the world did I do? This is, like something went wrong or there was a financial hiccup or whatever. But just because it's difficult or not natural initially doesn't mean that it was the wrong decision. And so that for me has been helpful because FBI was predictable. It was easy in the fact that I knew what I was doing. The work wasn't easy, but it was like I knew what to expect. And then I come into this other space where I'm like, oh, I need to go to the manager and I'm the manager. Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
But for me, it's like those bumps in the road don't mean that I made a mistake. It just means that I'm learning something new.
They're stretching in
and
a
I think
good
that's
way.
important.
And I think go back to your first day at the academy, right? You're sitting there, you're stressed, you're worried, you're scared. No matter how prepared you are, you're not capable of doing the job, right? And then you're built up over however long that is. And when you get to that graduation day, you're a different person who that first day could not have done what you accomplished. And so it's the same thing. Like, it's okay to be scared.
Yeah.
It's okay to learn, to grow. We all do. Same thing. You get to sergeant, you study for a test, you enhance your skills, and you keep progressing. It's the same thing. It's just a new language.
Yeah.
It's we have our jargon, business has theirs. So it's learning what that, the buzzwords of the corporate, speak for this year. Sometimes this quarter, it seems, right? But it's think back to day one of the academy. I guarantee there was a moment of doubt somewhere when you got there or the drive there. What was I thinking? I can't do this. Why am I here? Look at that person could bench press twice my weight. Why, and you made it.
That's the imposter syndrome of like, don't try and figure out the abyss, jump into it almost. Is that, but is there parts of that was there anything anybody found out after they made the leap that they maybe would? Because people ask me that sometimes. They say, would you do it all over again? I'm like, well, that imposter syndrome, looking back on it, knowing what I know now, I had no business doing this. You know what I mean? Like, because it was knowing numbers and everything else. But I wouldn't change it. And there's things that you figure out and that you jump in and do. But just curious, did anybody kind of have that experience of
what's the new normal? For me, I'd worked for the last probably 5 years of my career. I'd been a sergeant. Well, most of them were spent on PM's hours. So getting off at 11 or midnight, well, my wife and kids had a routine, and magic be like, hey, it's 5 o'clock, I'm home now. So they had to adjust everything. Right. And that took some adjustment because, they had their routine.
Yeah.
When I was working, this is what it was. And now magically I'm home at night and we have to adjust everything. And it took a while. Like, I mean, that was a whole different stress that I did not anticipate, was the home stress, because I was busy trying to understand business and understand what is going on inside the organization and adjust to a whole new level of normal at work. Was also adjusting to a whole new level at home.
And it's that you get to that level of, like you were saying, when you're at the academy and you start, you don't know anything. Well, you get 15 years in, it's comfortable. And so you're going from this, I can do this in my sleep, to, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And that's an uncomfortable feeling, but stretched in a good way, I think.
Well, and I think if you look back, let's go right after 9/11. if you had law enforcement, federal agency, whatever that was, experience, all of a sudden you can go and get a job
valuable,
in corporate America, right?
Yeah.
Because of the badge.
Yeah.
You fast forward now and you're expected to be a security professional, right?
Yeah.
And law enforcement does a lot of security functions, but it's not. And so I think where a lot of these people see the success of their predecessors was, police, FBI, Secret Service, whatever the agency is. And now they're getting in there and you have to transfer your skills into the business. It's no longer just good enough that you were what you were.
100%.
And I think
that's a great point.
People have been given kind of this false hope of, well, I'm good enough for what this. It's not that you're not, but you still have to learn. And it's not going to be what you did yesterday.
Yeah.
Day one in the new job is going to be completely different. And it's an adjustment. It really is. But I think it's a mindset that we need to be getting out to people.
Yeah.
I am in the process of interviewing for a director role. I had over 300 applicants. And I had so many people that their resume was 7, 8, 9 pages of SWAT and weapons qualifications and all that. Listen, no one cares in corporate America that you're qualified on 7 different weapons, unless your only job is maybe executive protection and arm,
Right.
But you have to tailor, you have to, I think, find your new identity, like start thinking for that. But you have to transfer those skills and tailor the resume to the private sector.
Such a good point. I was a SWAT operator and I thought that on my resume was I'm going to be director of the chiefs of security, and it's such a different, because the police, our experience a lot is responding to crimes when the corporate position is saying, no, we want you to prevent them. So when you're talking about SEPTED and all this different stuff, that's where the CPP and I think ASIS comes into place is it's rounding yourself out with a whole skill set, because if you have both, if you see what happens after the incident happens, there's a ton of value in that. But if you also have the classroom educational experience of how to prevent that, that's how you can really round yourself out. I think that's a very good point. And part of probably what I was saying when it's talking about preparing yourself for that is, what is the role and do you have the skills that make you attractive to stand out from the other candidates that have the same resume you are? If it's just law enforcement experience, unfortunately, there's a dime a dozen of people that are retiring or looking to transition with just that.
Well, there's a big aspect of that too, is supervision. Stan Partlow talks about that, where if you're not willing to take time to be a supervisor in law enforcement, why would we expect you to just transfer to that role in the corporate world?
Right.
Because they don't have time to train you. Companies have to make profit. Companies have to make sure that the business operates. Security is always second to the business.
Right.
People can feel differently about that, but that's the reality of the situation. Is security is always second to the business
until something bad happens.
Well, but in general, the business has to make profit, and it always has to operate, because if not, security doesn't matter.
And that's probably better said. The ROI is how much does it cost us when an event happens, and how much does it cost us to prevent that?
Well, and I think another thing to look at is when you work for a police department, a sheriff's agency, state patrol, whatever that is, the only function is law enforcement, right?
Yes.
Yes, it's a product of the government, and there's, but that is the only purpose. When you go, to your point, you now you're a business enabler. Your job is to make sure the business operates, and it is. Another thing is, you get $100 million in on a budget, you can spend $100 million on your products, right? Or in the government, right?
Right.
There's no taxes, there's no profits.
Right.
When you go to the private sector, it's all about EBITDA and shareholder value, especially if you have a publicly traded company, and it changes everything. So that $100 million is now, well, we need $60 million for operating costs, and the other $40 million is going back to the shareholders. Well, now every penny counts, right? And so you have to be prepared. It's a completely different mentality, and so you have to show how you're enabling that business and supporting it and helping them make money. Because you're right, the metrics of crimes prevented, it's impossible to track. You can't quantify it.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think the big thing is when you're going through that, like, your sole purpose in law enforcement really is law enforcement.
Yep.
you're secondary, to Terry's point, in the business. It's not that no one cares.
Right.
It's not that people, I am in both roles I've had in the private sector, very supported by leadership, all the way up. But it's still, they got to make money for the purpose of the business. And so I think you got to figure out a way you translate that as well and show how you're bringing value in ways other than revenue.
Yeah.
Well, for example, like, I manage hundreds of card readers across the organization. If things aren't working properly, then the business is not making money because people can't get into where they need to get into or anything like that. And you two have a whole different realm. I can't remember the term that you use for it's like the hours. They're when you have contract guard service, there has
Billable hours.
Yeah, well, you have the billable hours, but there has to be this much that breaks down for the expenditure for
Direct
insurance
labor
and things like that. That's a whole different world, and Rachel has a whole different world.
Right.
You both have a whole different world.
From a context or perspective of time frame, you have been with Shamrock for about 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Where are we at in there?
Just over the 3-year
mark. Is that right?
Yep.
So, and then I'm just kind of interested timeline-wise, when did you all make that leap, or kind of how long have you been in the private sector versus public sector from a timeline perspective?
I'm going, August will be 4 years for me.
Okay.
And I'm 2.5 right now because I left in January of 23 is when I quit the FBI. And I gave myself 2 days before I started my new job. And that is also something I don't recommend because I was so worried with that imposter syndrome. I gave myself 0 transition time to reflect on what just happened, prioritize things. And so I think it's worth assessing, do I have a little bit of cushion where I could have maybe taken a week or 2 to kind of reset and reestablish rather than quitting on a Friday and Monday being like, okay, here we go. Because that was a lot.
I did 2 days as well, so I agree.
No kidding. And that's 4 years. So you were Kentucky Derby. How long were you there before? And then was the Chiefs your next leap from there?
3 years to the day, and then the opportunity at the Chiefs. So it came out in September.
No kidding. Wow. So that quick. How did that opportunity come about? Same thing, network and no kidding.
Just knowing people, conferences, networking.
Yeah.
And that's one, I can't stress that one enough. That comes up. I mean, I almost don't know anybody that hasn't had that. And that's why I think ASIS and this discussion around this transition from the public to private sector is so relevant. There's people that are interested in this, but I don't know of that many people who haven't had that networking effect that has helped them kind of jump into that. I know that was a big one for you.
I mean, I can't stress the importance of it. I talked to I messaged with every single one of you prior to ever meeting you in person.
Yeah.
I just can't stress putting yourself out there and chatting with people.
Do you feel like that was deliberate in the sense of you were deliberately trying to network to find different opportunities, or did that just come naturally as part of your kind of organic network that it just happened?
I just really like people.
Yeah.
And I think I've learned so much from people from LinkedIn content and things they share, but also you travel and conferences are great, but you go down to the hotel lobby after and just talk to people, and you can learn so much about industries, and people open up and they'll tell you what their thoughts on the next 3 to 5 years are. And you can take, 15 different conversations at one event, and you can kind of round out where you think things are going. And then you're like, okay, I need to go research more on this and learn. I just love it from it's like a education, free resource for me.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Similar, Rachel?
Yeah, same. I've always been really interactive, and relationship building was really important at the FBI because we worked in tandem with a lot of our local law enforcement and prosecutors and all of that. So I was kind of used to that. And I do believe networking is still important, even in the mental health field, because again, if you don't have buy-in from the people and the public, then you don't have customers. And so I wouldn't say that it was intentional, it was natural, but it pays dividends. And so it's been something I have been more intentional about since I do like it. And I've met a lot of people that I've never even met in person, but we've been able to partner and collaborate. And that's the beauty of social media when you do it well. And so if you're not somebody who knows how to write a resume, knows how to, get your profile where it should be, definitely get help on that, because there's a lot of people that don't do that well and you don't stand out. You mentioned like 300 applicants. If your resume is not, it doesn't help you stand out, then you will just be overlooked so quickly.
Yeah.
Can I add something in real quick? If you're transitioning from law enforcement to the private sector, don't send unsolicited resumes to people. I get that all the time. People send me their resumes, and I just have to kind of ignore them, because it's not that I'm trying to be mean, but build that relationship first.
Yeah.
And the relationships, I think that's kind of, we're coming up here on the hour, and kind of in closing here, just kind of interested. I know there's folks out there that may be looking for advice or kind of what we would tell them to do. But when you talk about that networking thing and that comes up, if somebody's reaching out, what sorts of things do you respond to or to? And my advice would be, don't start with the ask of, I'm looking for a job. There's part of that relationship where I'm not going to promote somebody or put them, hey, I think this person would be a good fit or you should look until I know them, or I could be able to say, this is somebody that has some skills that I think would be a fit here, or that type of thing. But just kind of curious, what stands out to you when people do reach out? What do you respond with, or what advice would you give folks?
Yeah, when people message me, I try to be very responsive, and I'm more than happy to talk with them. I've helped dozens of people with their resumes. Like you talked about the SWAT operator type of thing. It's more, hey, I managed X amount of people. These commanders, I've talked to commanders all over the country, and they don't understand that, you managed a fleet of vehicles. When you review body cam footage and you're doing driving reviews, that's an operational audit.
Great point.
You're preventing major liability issues. So, I help people with their resumes all the time, and I have no problems talking to people. But the sales pitch, salespeople hit us. I guarantee you, salespeople hit you up all the time. And I generally start, and I started with Josh when I messaged him, when he was coming to Kansas City, be like, hey, I'm not a salesperson. I'm on the board for ASIS here in Kansas City. I'm just looking to make a local connection. And if you need something, I'm here for you. I'm not trying to pitch you a product. I'm not trying to do whatever. But if you have that type of relationship, that's what's really important as far as that goes. But starting off with the context of, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you have any advice, or would you be willing to chat about? Sure, no problem.
Yeah. No, kind of interested to hear from both of you. And two, one of the things I wanted to finish, we started this with kind of, you felt when you made that transition that you lost purpose. You're 4 years past that. Is that feeling still there? Do you feel like now you have a new purpose? Just kind of interested in that, because that's an important.
Absolutely. I remember we were doing a neighborhood meeting for my first derby, and the neighbors, this was the first full derby post-COVID. And so you went from, normal derby over 150,000 spectators derby week, just shy of 500,000 for derby day, just shy of 500,000 for the week. And a lot of the neighbors park people's cars and will pay their mortgage based on what they make in that 1 year.
Wow.
So when you look, the max capacity for 2021 Derby was, I think, like 25,000 people, and it was all parked inside. So there was no people. And they're like, listen, we felt it. We almost lost our house. We almost did this. And then I learned the economic impact every year to the Louisville economy is about $400 million. Wow. And comparatively, the next 14 largest events in Louisville combined are about half that.
Wow.
And so I quickly realized my purpose is the same. Now, the mission is different, but we're protecting something that matters to our local, our economy, the people that are there. And so I was able to make a mind shift, really.
Yeah.
And again, different mission, same purpose. And I think in my current role, same thing, 70,000 plus people on a game day, an iconic brand. And as someone new to Kansas City, let me say, this city absolutely rallies around the city and all their sports team. And so you're protecting something besides just a sports enterprise. You're protecting something that matters to this local community.
Well, and we didn't get into that much, and maybe that's a different podcast episode, but I'm sure that the security threat landscape has changed considerably. The Chiefs today are a different organization than they were 5-10 years ago, and kind of just seeing how that grows. That is an interesting conversation that could go on for hours and days, but would love to pick your brain sometime about that. But no, Rachel, it just kind of in closing, any sort of advice or thoughts or things that we left on the table here, didn't discuss, or anything you might tell somebody interested?
I mean, to echo what
similar?
he just mentioned, it is that mindset shift. So for me, I was like, I am protecting children. Like there's no greater reward, in my opinion, to know that I'm protecting children from predators. But then when I had the mindset shift and said, now I'm helping the helpers and I'm protecting mental health, which is something that we will always carry with us. And to do it for first responders is truly an honor. To be trusted when somebody is often in, the worst condition that they've been mentally, for them to trust me to help them get back on the other side. I think I underscored and understated how important that role would be and how good it feels to still be providing a value to the community. Because when I think about it, like our citizens want healthy police, fire, and EMS coming to them during calls of service. And so again, bigger mission. It's not just about the police or just about dispatchers. It's about them being able to respond to calls because they're in a good mental space. And that ripple effect is huge.
Yeah, no, very well said. I agree. That's a pretty important mission for sure. But well, I appreciate everybody coming on and sharing this. I mean, kind of parting ways, we're all available. We'll link everything in the show, and certainly encourage people to reach out or ask questions. And certainly we can answer that from there. But any final thoughts before we sign off here? I certainly appreciate you all coming and sharing very interesting stories and backgrounds, and sounds very similar. But
thanks for hosting, and thanks for doing it.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, great. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.